You can spend hours banging your head against a punishingly difficult video game level, failing repeatedly, yet you eagerly hit retry. Meanwhile, an incredibly minor mandatory task, like opening a boring email or organizing a basic spreadsheet, makes you immediately reach for your phone to avoid the friction. Humans are biologically wired to conserve energy, so why do we willingly subject ourselves to intense frustration when there is absolutely no external payoff? We usually assume some people are naturally driven and others are simply lazy. But this contradiction points to a severe flaw in our basic understanding of human behavior. For decades, we've relied on a standard model for motivation. This classic calculation dictates your motivation equals the final reward minus the task difficulty. The core assumption here is that effort is a cost, a heavy weight pulling down your willingness to act. But look around, and you will see behaviors that completely break this rule. People wake up at dawn to lift heavy metal plates, run exhausting marathons until their feet blister, and spend their Sunday mornings solving complex crossword puzzles. Since we actively seek out certain types of grueling work, there must be a hidden psychological variable altering how the brain calculates its willingness to engage. That variable is the nature of the task itself. The psychological cost of effort isn't static. It fluctuates depending on the specific cognitive demands of the work you are doing. A recent study by psychologists Alyssa Randez and Sebastian Healy looked directly at this dynamic. They set up an experiment where participants had to choose between tasks requiring entirely different types of effort, like memorizing sequences versus executing precise motor responses. What they found was that participants didn't base their choices solely on the monetary payout or the raw difficulty of the task. They were actively choosing based on the specific cognitive components involved in the work. This flowchart breaks down a concept known as intrinsic motivation. Notice that the experience of doing the activity generates its own internal reward, a psychological spark, long before the person ever reaches the final outcome. Effort isn't a fixed universal cost. Its value is actively and dynamically negotiated between your mind and the structural design of the problem you are trying to solve. If you modify a task's internal architecture, you can drastically alter the amount of human output it receives, even if the external reward at the finish line remains exactly the same. This is exactly why video games are so effective at keeping us hooked. They display visible, incremental advancement. When you can see a progress bar rapidly filling up, the effort suddenly feels constructive rather than pointless. Those immediate feedback loops keep the brain locked into an activity. Every action did Zudea, transforming failure into a learning mechanism instead of a reason to quit. This bell curve illustrates the relationship between difficulty and interest. On the far left, an activity is so easy it induces pure boredom. On the right, it is so hard it creates overwhelming frustration. But right in the middle is a narrow, optimal peak known as the challenge zone. When you hit this sweet spot, the psychological script flips. The task's difficulty stops being a barrier and becomes the feature driving the experience. Motivation is not something you passively wait for or summon from within. It is something you can engineer by structurally redesigning the feedback and challenge levels of an activity. We have to be highly specific about the science here. This research does not prove that humans are genetically wired to love an endless grind, and it doesn't mean making a task arbitrarily harder automatically yields more motivation. The relationship between effort and enjoyment is volatile. It depends entirely on individual differences and unique cognitive preferences. Structural task redesign also cannot replace your physical limits. It will not compensate for a lack of sleep, missing resources, or an absence of baseline skill. Manipulating task design is a precise tool. It's not a magical hack for unlimited willpower. When we hate a task, our standard response is to just try harder, but forcing yourself through pure friction is a failing strategy. Instead, break a stagnant, monolithic task down into visible micro-milestones. Change its cognitive demand, track your progress differently, and find a rhythm you can actually engage with. The next time procrastination hits, don't immediately assume you're just being lazy. Ask yourself if the problem is your work ethic or simply the architecture of the task you are facing.